welcome back to the SCIdeShow podcast. So it looks like this show is actually going somewhere. This is our second show. Second show! And also, we were just accepted by the iTunes podcast app, so make sure that you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today's episode was an idea that was given to me by someone, and it was stated as a joke of sorts, but I actually ran with it because it seemed rather appropriate. That I will be discussing the science behind procrastination, more so the psychology around it, because I have been absolutely fascinated with psychology and neuroscience for quite some time. And recently I found myself thinking that I may have missed my calling to enter into one of those fields. Why we think what we do is absolutely fascinating to me. Now, with that being said, a little disclaimer that I am not a psychologist, nor am I a psychotherapist. So there may be some components of this topic that I may be completely wrong on, but I just have to admit my ignorance. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty, what exactly is procrastination? I would imagine a fair amount of people know, but for those who don't know, procrastination is actively putting off more meaningful tasks and replacing them with ones that actually don't matter, such as doing a Sudoku instead of writing that term paper for a class, and then you put it off until the very last possible moment, which usually ends up causing more stress and getting a terrible or lackluster result. Now, despite what an awful lot of people might think, is that procrastination has actually been around long before the advent of the internet, with an example that I found dating back to 800 BC by the Greek poet Hesiod. And he cautions not to put off your work till tomorrow and the day after. APS fellow Joseph Ferrari says that he found everyone procrastinates, but not everyone is actually a procrastinator. He finds that it has nothing to do with time management. To quote him, as I tell people, to tell the chronic procrastinator to just do it would be like saying to a clinically depressed person to cheer up. All I was doing my research is that I had found that most psychologists believe that procrastination can be the result of one of three things: either fear of failure, perfectionism, and fear of success. And I will go over all three of these as best as I can. First up is discussing the fear of failure. This psychology behind in exposing the 1, 2, 3. First up is fear of failure. The psychology behind it is exposing the feeling of the adequacy, and they're worried that they will be perceived as thinking that they are special, almost as if they will be seen differently if they accomplish something, and they will be made to feel guilty. In a blog post on Psychology Today simply entitled "Why Do You Procrastinate?" by Pamela Weigars and Kevin Giogos, they cover many of the different possible reasons for why we procrastinate. They have a simple questionnaire which could prove helpful to some. I've included the link on the blog post on the website. In another posting on Psychology Today's website by Tina Gilbertson, she addresses some possible family values that could affect someone and actually create these conflicts. One being humility, that we shouldn't be made to feel special. Another one is security. One more is having it all together. It's almost like if you don't know what you're doing, then don't really bother. Being selfless, so if you fail, you have wasted precious resources on yourself. Another is not taking more than your share, and you should be happy with what you have. Hard work, which this one we all can kind of relate to, and sometimes we felt that in the past. If you fail, it's because you didn't work hard enough. And perfection, which means you only get one shot at it, so you better get it right. Which is kind of funny considering that's another possible reason. She suggests that one step in helping yourself with this fear is by taking baby steps. Personally went through that myself and became overwhelmed by thinking too big and too far in advance, and that was mentally exhausting and sometimes frightening. I believe the example she used, saying you don't explore the Grand Canyon by leaping off the edge, which is not terrible life advice either. Now, baby steps can be seen by different people as meaning different things. I doubt she means in terms of by starting a business and then finally choosing a logo color after a year of starting your business. That's not exactly a baby step. According to Martin Covington of the University of California, the fear of failure is directly linked to the person's self-worth. Failure to perform means that they feel that themselves to be not worthy, and down they go. But if the person doesn't believe they are able to have the ability to succeed, then they will participate in practices that actually preserve their self-worth. He divided his students into 4 categories. One being success-orientated, which means that failure can be used to improve oneself. The second was overstrivers, which means failure was unacceptable and they succeed by any means necessary to the point of possible harm. Third was failure avoiding students, procrastinate just by dawdling and provide excuses and don't really expect to succeed. And then the fourth one was failure accepting students, almost the what's the point of trying mentality. Now, with me being a Star Trek fan, there is one quote that I was reminded of, which I think fits in with the last category when Captain Jean-Luc Picard is speaking with Data. He says, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness, that is life." And I'm pretty sure we've all experienced this to some degree, making sure everything was just right and still wind up losing or having it go wrong. For example, studying for a final exam weeks in advance and only walk out with a 52%. It sucks and you may have prepared. I personally have experienced that myself. Not exactly the best feeling in the world, but it happens. Next up is perfectionism, which was a little tricky in doing my research, so in the future hopefully somebody will be able to educate me a little bit more on this one. In doing my reading, I found that according to Paul Hewitt and his colleague Gordon Flett, in their 20 years of research, that they have found that perfectionism is directly correlated with depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. Now, the last bit I found a little shocking, but we've all gone through this to some degree. In school, when I would be trying to get something just right, I would actually forget to eat for a day or two. Not exactly the best thing to do, and with me sharing that little story, I am not comparing my not eating for a day to a serious eating disorder. And according to Kenneth Rice, he believes that there are 2 classes of perfectionists, the adaptive and the maladaptive. Both have very high standards, but one finds something to go wrong more stressful than the other one. You could probably figure out which one he's talking about. But also in context, according to Randy Frost, is that what is adaptive to someone in one situation may not be to someone else in another. One of the reasons that they say that we procrastinate that I found really interesting was the fear of success. I had heard this phrase years ago, but I never really looked into it. Upon doing my research, I found that it had the alternate name, the Jonah complex, named by Abraham Maslow's professor friend Frank Manuel. Maslow, as we all know, he is best known for the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid. The complex is described as someone's fear of self-actualization, being afraid of how great you can be. It is called the Jonah complex, as stated by Maslow. So often we run away from responsibilities dictated, or rather suggested by nature, by fate, or sometimes even by accident, just as Jonah tried in vain to run away from his own fate. And this Jonah that he's referring to is from the Bible, Jonah being swallowed by the great fish, or whale. It's been a while since I've read the Bible, I forget. It's brought on by the fear of seeming arrogant and self-centered, that having an extraordinary life would be out of the ordinary and it would be looked down upon by other people. I would assume even more so by those people that are close to you. Psychologist Susan Babel claims that with her specialty in PTSD, the excitement of accomplishing something feels very close to that of a traumatic experience, which I found extremely fascinating, but it also sounded very close to that one study that I had heard about a little while ago where they said that love and hate are essentially created by the same biological circuitry. So when you may feel love towards something, you may actually hate it, but you don't really know why, or you can't really tell the difference, which I absolutely found fascinating. And with one feeling like the other, and if you had more of one feeling than the other, it would make sense for me to have the feeling that you're more familiar with. So fear of failure or the excitement. Another thing that she mentions in this article is that most people are subject to verbal abuse throughout their lives, being made to feel like losers. Mix that in with the phrase, don't get your hopes up, and you may feel like you do not deserve the success or would be afraid should it actually happen. And that is it for this episode. With all I've said, I have to reiterate, I'm not an expert on this topic, but I will be returning to it, hopefully with someone who actually knows what they're talking about. As I stated before, that I have included the links to everything that I had mentioned, so it shows that I'm not really pulling things out of thin air. and it is on the blog post on our show's website. Yes, we have an actual website, SCIdeShowPodcast.com, SCIDE showpodcast.com. And I would also like to thank you for listening and leave a review on the website or on iTunes. It would really help this thing along. The show is also available on SoundCloud and YouTube, where I will also have links on the website. Thank you for stopping by, and let's talk again.